There was a man the whole world knew, whose face was on the covers, whose name was spoken alongside the biggest names in Hollywood, a man who received standing ovations and was envied in silence. And here is the question nobody dared to ask out loud. Where did he go? Not off the stage, not off the screen. He never left, he is still here. But something changed. Something broke inside that brilliant success story they were showing us for years. And today we are going to tell you exactly what. Because behind that polished facade was a different story. A story about a man who spent his entire life chasing his father's shadow and never caught it. About failures that were carefully hidden. About a dependency he never denied, but about which you probably did not know the full truth. About losses that would have broken anyone. And about a scandal unfolding right now. We have insider sources. We have his own words, the ones he said and possibly regretted later. We have details that never made it into the official interviews. Watch until the end, because the most unexpected part is still ahead. And trust us, you did not expect to see him like this. Hollywood has a talent for cruel jokes, and in 2024, it delivered one of its cruelest, aimed directly at Kiefer Sutherland. That year, Sutherland appeared in a film called Hollywood, playing a character named Bradley Mack. And who is Bradley Mack? A former action star. A man everyone once recognized and almost no one remembers now. A character who takes whatever work comes along just to avoid disappearing from screens completely. A character who smiles and pretends everything is fine, even though nothing has been fine for a long time. Now ask yourself, is that a description of Bradley Mack or of Kiefer Sutherland himself? In one of the film's central scenes, Sutherland's character appears in a theatrical costume with exaggerated stage makeup caked across his face and delivers the following line with complete sincerity. "This is the best time of my life." The audience laughs. The director clearly intended exactly that reaction. But there is about as much comedy here as there is in watching someone drown while waving their hand and pretending they are simply swimming. Because strip away the costume and the makeup, and Sutherland himself could have spoken that line. And perhaps that is precisely why he took the role. Remember what he was. In the 90s, Kiefer Sutherland did not ask for roles. He was offered them. His characters did not explain themselves or justify their choices. They controlled every room they entered simply by being in it. The cold stare, the deliberate pause, the unmistakable sense that this man knows something you do not. Those were his best years, playing figures in whom authority, menace, and moral ambiguity existed in perfect, unsettling combination. That was what audiences loved. That was what made him irreplaceable. Bradley Mack is the precise opposite. He is a man who has nothing left but the appearance of something, a costume without a role, a smile without conviction. The line, "This is the best time of my life," does not land as triumph. It lands as the reflex of a man who is afraid to stop moving and look back at what he has left behind. And Sutherland played it convincingly, perhaps too convincingly. The film was released, and instead of conversations about its cinematic qualities, the conversation moved immediately somewhere else. Critics and audiences were not discussing direction or screenplay. They were discussing the parallel, the one that is impossible to ignore and uncomfortable to name out loud. A man who built an entire career on images of strength and control, playing a character who has neither, and doing so at the precise moment in his life when questions about his own professional future are growing louder by the month. Coincidence? Perhaps, but in Hollywood, coincidences do not happen by accident, especially when it comes to choosing roles. At one point, Sutherland set the standard. His Jack Bauer in the series 24, 8 seasons, running from 2001 to 2010, was not simply a popular character. He was a cultural event, a symbol of an era, a figure who was admired, feared, and envied in equal measure. After 24 wrapped, it seemed as though everything was open to Sutherland, that he would choose his projects on his own terms, in his own time, for as long as he wished. That is not what happened. Bradley Mack stares into the camera in his cheap theatrical makeup and announces that he is living his best life. Kiefer Sutherland plays him with a precision that makes the audience uneasy. Not because the performance is poor, because the performance is too good, too real, too close to something that should not be this visible. And that, perhaps, is the most revealing thing Sutherland has said about himself in years. Not in any interview, not in any public statement, but directly on screen, in the shape of a man who smiles and pretends. Kiefer Sutherland did not start from nothing. He started with a surname that opened doors in Hollywood before he even had a chance to knock. His father is Donald Sutherland, a man who needs no introduction to anyone who has ever seriously watched a film. MASH, Clute, Ordinary People, The Hunger Games. Donald Sutherland spent more than 6 decades in the profession and left it with a reputation that cannot be bought or manufactured. He was one of those actors people describe with a single word: real. No qualifications, no footnotes. To be born the son of such a man is both a privilege and a sentence. A privilege because doors open. A sentence because behind every open door stands the same silent question: are you worthy of it? Kiefer Sutherland was born in 1966 in London, where his parents were working at the time. He grew up knowing what a film set looked like, not from books, but from life. He made his screen debut at 18. By 20, he had been noticed. At 21, he appeared in The Bay Boy, and soon after joined Rob Lowe and Emilio Estevez in the ensemble that the press was already calling the Brat Pack, a young Hollywood generation expected to dominate the decade. The future arrived, but not immediately, and not quite as expected. In 1987, The Lost Boys was released, and it was that film that transformed Sutherland from a promising young actor into a genuine star. His David was beautiful, dangerous, and entirely uncontrollable. Audiences fell for characters like that instantly and did not forget them easily. Young Guns followed, then A Few Good Men, then The Three Musketeers, and dozens of other projects in which Sutherland consistently occupied the top lines of the credits. He was not a one-note actor. He could play menace and magnetism in the same breath. He knew how to be silent in a way that made silence weigh more than dialogue. He could step into a frame and make it impossible for the camera to look anywhere else. And yet, the defining role of his life did not come from cinema at all. In 2001, the series 24 began. The premise was simple and revolutionary in equal measure. Each episode covering 1 hour of real time, each season covering a single day in the life of Agent Jack Bauer. No flashbacks, no time jumps, only unbroken tension that held from the first minute to the last. Television before 24 and television after 24 are two different things. The series redefined the standard of its genre as decisively as The Godfather once redefined the gangster film. Jack Bauer became a cultural phenomenon, not merely a popular character, a reference point. When Americans or Europeans wanted to describe an image of an unyielding man willing to cross any line to get a result, they named Jack Bauer. Politicians cited him in debates. Military analysts discussed his methods in complete seriousness. Time magazine placed him on lists of the most influential fictional figures of the decade. Across 8 seasons, from 2001 to 2010, Sutherland collected an Emmy Award, 2 Golden Globes, and something the industry values above any trophy: universal recognition. Not as Donald Sutherland's son, not as the guy from The Lost Boys, as Kiefer Sutherland, full stop. That was the peak, a real, undeniable, measurable peak. And that is precisely where the part of this story that Hollywood prefers not to discuss begins. Because a peak is not a finish line. A peak is a place from which the only direction is down. The only question is how fast and how far. After 24, wrapped in 2010, Sutherland stood at the top with the full conviction that what lay ahead was simply more of the same. That an industry which had just given him a standing ovation would not forget and would not turn away. That the next defining role was already waiting somewhere. He only needed to reach for it. That expectation cost him more than he had calculated. When a person does not want to speak for themselves, others speak for them. And sometimes the words of others are more precise than anything the person could have said about themselves. A source close to Sutherland's circle gave a comment to the Daily Mail, anonymously, without a name, without a title, without the right of rebuttal. Comments like that are always read most carefully in Hollywood, because people who speak without their names attached tend to speak the truth. This is what was said. Kiefer has been searching since he was 24 for the one role that would challenge him and send him on a real acting journey, because he always wanted to build a career like his father Donald's. One sentence, and the entire story is in it. Not a career for money, not a career for fame, a career to one day stand next to his father and not feel smaller. To one day hear not Donald Sutherland's son, but simply Kiefer Sutherland, an equal. Not an heir, but an independent force. Donald Sutherland spent more than 60 years in the profession. He appeared in films that became history, and did so in a way that made him impossible to confuse with anyone else and impossible to replace. The standard he set, simply by existing, was not merely high. It was the kind you spend your entire life reaching for, and do not always reach. Kiefer knew this better than anyone. He grew up alongside that standard. He saw what it looked like close up, and he spent several decades trying to match it. Jack Bauer seemed like the answer. 8 seasons of thunderous success, tens of millions of viewers worldwide, awards, magazine covers, quotes in the news, all of it looked like the thing he had been working toward. But Jack Bauer was a television character, and Donald Sutherland is MASH, ordinary people, Clute, roles taught in acting classes as examples of how it is done. The difference between those 2 careers is not a question of talent, it is a question of weight, of what remains afterward. The same source added something else, and that something sounds less like commentary and more like a clinical finding. He thought Designated Survivor would work out, but it ended too. He thought he would get roles that ultimately never came to him. He doesn't handle losses well. He has been working in Hollywood for decades and still struggles to get the roles that actually mean something to him. Take that apart piece by piece. Designated Survivor, a series launched in 2016 in which Sutherland played the President of the United States, looked like a second chance at the kind of scale that matched 24. 2 seasons, then cancellation. The roles that never came are not an abstraction. They are specific projects, specific negotiations, specific moments when the phone did not ring or rang with the wrong answer. In Hollywood, those moments do not disappear. They accumulate, and with time they begin to weigh more than all the roles that did arrive put together. Doesn't handle losses well. 3 words that describe a character entirely. A person who does not handle losses well cannot pretend that everything is fine, cannot shake it off and walk forward smiling. People like that either break or continue throwing themselves at the same wall with twice the force. Sutherland, by all indications, chose the second. But the wall did not get any softer. And finally, the heaviest part. Still struggles to get the roles that actually mean something to him. Not roles in general, roles that mean something. That is a crucial difference. Work exists, filming exists, screen time exists. But that sensation of reading a script and knowing this is yours, this is exactly the challenge worth everything, that is absent. And a man who knows what that sensation feels like, and Sutherland knows, he felt it with Jack Bauer, cannot simply accept less and pretend he is satisfied. The anonymous source was not judging, he was describing, but sometimes a precise description lands harder than any verdict. There are things a person says publicly only when they no longer see any reason to conceal them. Not because they are broken, but because they are tired of pretending that everything is going according to plan. Kiefer Sutherland gave an interview to The Independent and said what Hollywood people are not supposed to say out loud, especially people with his resume. After 24, I thought opportunities would naturally come my way. One sentence, and in it, the complete portrait of a man who confused what he had earned with what he was owed. He does not say it with bitterness. He says it as a fact, as a man who has already passed through every stage and come out on the other side, not broken, but recalibrated. After 8 seasons of 24, after the awards, after his face appeared on magazine covers and his name was mentioned alongside the most influential figures in television, after all of that, he expected the industry to come to him, that the next major project would arrive by itself, that being Kiefer Sutherland was enough. The industry did not come, and then he said this, but the truth is, if you don't create those opportunities yourself, they simply won't exist. As someone who loves to work, I went through periods of not working for a long time because I wasn't doing the necessary planning. That admission is worth more than it appears. There is no victim in it, and no accusations directed at Hollywood. He says plainly, it was me. I did not plan, I waited, and nothing arrived from waiting. In an industry where it is customary to redirect responsibility towards studios, producers, a changed market, a younger generation that no longer watches the same things, Sutherland talks about himself. That is rare, and that is precisely why his words land so heavily. But the heaviest part is still ahead. I'm acutely aware that people cared much more about what I thought when I was 30 than they do now. That is no longer about a career. That is about one's place in the world. About how a person's weight in the eyes of others changes, not because they became worse at what they do, but simply because they became older. At 30, Kiefer Sutherland opened his mouth and people listened. His opinions were quoted. His position carried weight. At 30, he was part of the conversation about where Hollywood was heading, where the culture was heading, what the next generation would look like. Now he is approaching 60, and that conversation no longer includes him. Not because he has nothing to say, but because no one is asking. This is the brutal reality of a profession where age does not simply change the roles available, it changes the status of the person. Actresses encounter this sooner and harder, but actors encounter it too. They simply talk about it less, and that is exactly why Sutherland's words land like a blow in a silent room. The numbers confirm what he is saying. Several of his recent projects either failed to find audiences or delivered neither the commercial nor the critical result the actor had expected. Negotiations over roles that seemed settled collapsed without explanation. Projects he had committed to were shut down ahead of schedule. None of that is catastrophic. It happens to everyone in Hollywood at some point. But when it happens to a man who remembers what it felt like to be the first name on the call sheet, each instance registers differently. He spoke about all of this without breaking down, without tears, without theatrical pauses. That is exactly why his words stay suspended in the air long after the interview is ended. A man approaching 60 says, "I believed I had earned the right to simply exist in this profession, and I was wrong. It turned out the right has to be earned every single day. And it turned out that with each passing year, that gets harder, not easier." Hollywood knows how to keep secrets, but there are things that cannot be hidden, especially when the person involved does not see any reason to hide them. Kiefer Sutherland drinks, and never made a secret of it, not because he has nothing to lose, and not because he does not care what people think, but because he made a decision a long time ago. He will not pretend. This is his life, his choice, his price, and he pays it himself, without complaints and without asking for leniency. In an interview with People magazine, he addressed this directly, without the careful diplomacy that actors typically employ when they are afraid of saying too much. "I've always enjoyed it. I was never the guy who, if things went wrong in my life, drowned his sorrows in alcohol. I was different. Believe me, I've had an extraordinary life, and one of my favorite things is to spend time with friends, telling stories and drinking a lot." This is not the confession of a man who is ashamed. It is the statement of a man who knows who he is and has no intention of apologizing for it. He does not say, "I struggled with a dependency." He does not say, "I went through it and came out stronger." He says, "I enjoy it. I choose it. It is part of who I am." But then come the words that change the entire picture. That said, I can say with confidence that every bad thing that has ever happened to me has been connected to my love of going to bars and drinking with friends. So it's been a contradiction throughout my life. That is a different conversation entirely, not romanticization, not justification, a direct, cold look at one's own life. Everything good that was in it was there. And everything bad that was in it was also there. And here is where it came from. He does not look away from it. He calls it a contradiction, and that is, perhaps, the most precise word available. A contradiction that has lived inside him since he was young, that gave him some of the best evenings of his life and some of the worst mornings. The legal troubles that have followed him for more than 2 decades are not an abstraction. They are specific dates, specific records, specific newspaper headlines. In 2004, he was arrested for driving under the influence and served 48 days in custody. Not suspended, not a fine, 48 days. In 2007 came another arrest on the same charge. Again the headlines, again the press, again the public dissection of something most people would prefer to keep behind a closed door. The incident in early 2025 involving a taxi driver added another line to that list. Details are still being clarified, but the context has been established for years. And yet he does not stop. Not because he cannot, but because he does not want to. He explained it himself. "I would rather work hard to preserve at least some of those moments than simply stop. And that is my choice. I live with it." There is not a single drop of self-pity in those words. No posture of a suffering man, no attempt to generate sympathy. There is a person who weighed everything on the scale, the joy and the consequences, the laughter at the table and the morning after, the friendship and the arrest, the reputation and the living moment, and chose what he chose. Deliberately, without illusions, with his eyes open. Hollywood does not forgive weakness. Everyone knows that. But Hollywood forgives honesty even less, because honesty destroys the image, and in this city, image is worth more than truth. Sutherland understood this long ago, and keeps telling the truth anyway. Perhaps that is precisely why it remains impossible not to listen to him. He could have learned the right words long ago, could have talked about working on himself, and mindfulness, and a new chapter, could have hired the right publicist and released the right statement at the right moment. He does none of that. He says, "This is my contradiction, I live with it, and it is my choice." In a world where everyone carefully manages their public image, that kind of honesty looks almost like a provocation. There are years that you simply live through, and there are years that outlive you, that stay inside and change something that cannot be put back the way it was. For Kiefer Sutherland, the past several years have been exactly that. In 2024, Donald Sutherland passed away. He was 88 years old. He had lived a long life, full of work, recognition, and a kind of presence that could be felt even at a distance. When people leave at that age, it is customary to say, "He lived a good life." That is true, but it changes nothing about what the person left behind feels. Because losing a father is not simply losing a person. It is the end of a particular world. The world in which you are still someone's child. The world in which there is still someone who remembers you before you became whoever you became. Kiefer and Donald were not a simple story. Years of distance, periods of silence, a complexity that both of them discussed rarely and reluctantly. But there was another side to it, a deep, undiminished admiration that never went anywhere. Kiefer spent his entire career wanting to build something like what his father had built. That is not simply professional ambition. It is the language of love between people who do not know how to speak about love any other way. And now the person he wanted to prove something important to is no longer there. Then came another blow, Rob Reiner, the director who gave a young Kiefer a role at the moment when that was not yet an obvious decision. In an industry that tends to treat young actors as interchangeable, Reiner looked differently. He did not see a promising boy with a recognizable last name. He saw an actor. That changes a person. It stays with a person for the rest of their life. That feeling of having been seen clearly before you have fully understood yourself. Losing someone like that is not simply grief. It is the loss of a particular mirror, the one in which you looked better than in any other. A source close to Sutherland described the situation this way. Kiefer has had issues with alcohol and he fights it every day. That battle gets harder when life throws difficulties at you. Losing his father and the pain of losing Rob Reiner, who was a mentor and a guiding star in his life and career. And on top of it all, getting older is simply no fun. 3 layers at once. The daily struggle with what he himself calls the contradiction of his life. The loss of the father he spent his entire life wanting to prove something to. The loss of the mentor who believed in him. Any one of those 3 would have been enough to be difficult. All 3 together, that is a different kind of weight. The kind that does not lift in a single conversation and does not pass in a single season. And on top of it, the incident from early 2025. The situation involving a taxi driver, the details of which are still being clarified. Again the press. Again the headlines. Again the questions he has not yet answered publicly. A new year that did not begin the way he had planned. In the life of a person already carrying too much, this is an extra burden, the kind that either breaks a person or forces them to pull themselves together. But those who know him say something different. It's not all bad for Kiefer, but he is going through difficulties and the new year didn't turn out as he expected. However, once all the details of the taxi driver incident are clarified, he is confident he will get through all of this, said the insider. And then added something that, in the context of everything in this story, sounds unexpectedly simple and unexpectedly important. Kiefer is a driven man, but a very kind one, and most people who cross his path speak of him only in warm terms. Kind. Not talented, not professional, not legendary. Kind. In a city where people are described through their achievements and failures, through box office results and ratings, through contracts and scandals, someone calls him kind. And that, perhaps, is the only quality that cannot be purchased, cannot be performed, and cannot be lost because of a poor project or a difficult year. Kiefer Sutherland has spent nearly 40 years in Hollywood. He has watched the industry build people and watched it break them. He has passed through both sides of that process himself. He lost his father, lost his mentor, absorbed blows that not everyone recovers from. He fights every day with something he does not pretend is easy. He is growing older in a profession that values youth over experience. He is searching for a role that will say what he wants to say, and has not found it yet. But he is searching, and that, in the end, is the answer to the question that hangs over this entire story. Not what happened to Kiefer Sutherland, but what happens to a person who refuses to stop. His story is not finished. It is simply, right now, in the kind of place that is dark and uncomfortable, the kind of place from which people either never emerge or emerge entirely changed. From everything those who know him say, he will emerge. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. We tell stories about real people with real lives behind the headlines. See you in the next one.